Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Kilayim, Chapter 5, Halacha 4. In the Art Scroll, we're on 49b3. Today, we're going to be getting into what happens when you plant inside of a vineyard. You're planting foreign seed, and we want to know how much are you going to disqualify, and how do you figure out how to do it? What's going to be the formulation for it? So the Mishnah says that if someone plants vegetables in a vineyard or maintains vegetables in a vineyard, and by the way, you should notice that the Mishnah is putting in these two criteria. One is somebody's going to plant it right now. The other is that somebody's coming along and they see that it's being maintained. Well, we know that if you're planting inside of a vineyard, that not only the vegetable would be disqualified, but the vines as well. You can't use either. So it says if one plants vegetables in a vineyard or maintains vegetables in a vineyard, it renders the surrounding 45 vines forbidden. Now, the question is, well, how do you get to 45? How is that going to work? Well, if you're putting the seed, and let's just say it's exactly one seed, well, then you're going to draw a circle, and that's going to be the key. You're always going to be drawing a circle around where this Kilayim is, and then you're going to be using 16 amos. So how do you get to 45? Let's say you have a vineyard where there's 9 vines by 9 vines, and that way you put right in the center point, you put a seed, and it's going to be exactly where one vine will be, in the center point. How do you determine it? What you're going to do is, and so that there's basically overlap. You're literally planting it together with it. So what you're going to do is you're going to draw a line going out 16 amos, which is going to be the radius. You're going to draw a circle around, and all of the vines there within that circle are going to be disqualified. That comes up to 45. Now, keep in mind, how did you do this, right? So the vines are separated at 4 amma intervals, and we covered that before. Anything less than that, they're going to say is not a vineyard. It's going to be like firewood. It's not really going to develop well, says the Rambam. So, 4 amma is really going to be the normal size vineyard. And so how do you get 45? Well, you're planting it right in the center. You're basically saying that going north and south, since these are in, rows, they're organized rows, and you're going to say, okay, going up 3 vines, and going left 3 vines, and going down 3 vines, and going right 3 vines, these are all going to be disqualified. That is going to add up to 45 when you count it out. Now, if you have these 4 amma intervals between these rows of vines, and now you're planting it within the work area, then what's going to happen is right in the center point where you're planting the seed, you have just above it, you're going to have 2 vines. Just below it, you're going to have 2 vines. Again, we're planting right in the center point now where it's going right in the work area. It's not going on top of a vine. It's going in the middle. And what are you going to do? You're going to measure out 16 amos. You're going to go draw your circle around. But again, you're going to be counting out 3 vines this way, 3 vines this way, 3 vines this way, 3 vines this way. But since it's in the middle point, you're going to have between 2 rows. And so you're going to end up with 52 vines falling within that circle. So the Mishnah is going to continue, and it's going to say, when are 45 vines rendered forbidden? It says when the vines are planted at 4 amma intervals or at 5 amma intervals. Now, it looks like these two are going to be connected. It looks like 4 amma and 5 amma is going to be connected. And we have to look at, why would this be that, well, how do you fit 45 in as disqualification if there's going to be 5 amma intervals? And this only makes sense when you're looking at the end of the sugya, at the end of this Gemara, at the end of this halacha, we're going to be dealing with something that's going to be d'Rabbanan. So that's going to be a hint that over here, this can be d'Rabbanan as well. So the 45 vines that we're talking about is going to be d'Oraita. The Tosfot Yom Tov is going to give an answer. He's going to say that these are connected, but one is going to be d'Rabbanan. And the idea that he gives, he explains this in detail. He's saying, look, that the average person can't tell the difference between 4 amos and 5 amos, especially if they're walking by. And so if somebody is ripping up a vineyard, and if you were going to see if you were going to measure it, right, you would end up with 37 vines instead of 45. Now, how does the Mishnah end up with these extra vines? And he's saying that, look, if somebody's walking by, they're not going to be able to tell the difference between these two different measurements. And he's going to see that the guy didn't tear up 45. And he's going to say, well, I don't need to tear up 45 either. And so what they're saying is the rabbis extended it a little bit above 16 to draw a few more vines in that was going to boost it from 37 up to 45. And that way, whenever somebody's walking by and seeing somebody clearing a field, they're always going to see a minimum measure of 45 vines being removed. So the answer that the Tosfot Yom Tov is giving is that the Mishnah wants to emphasize that rendering 45 vines forbidden is always going to be where that's what's going to get ripped out of the ground. One is going to be deraita, one is going to be a fence to make sure that nobody stumbles over this. And, they're going to come over and do a lower number of vines in their own vineyard because they'll see, oh, my neighbor only took out 37 instead of 45. Therefore, I can do that as well. But the problem is these vines that you'd be reducing if you had a 4 amma vineyard, those are going to be deraita vines. And so now you have in that vineyard vines that deraita should have been ripped out. So the Gemara, the Mishnah is going to continue. It's going to say, if, however, they were planted at 6 amma intervals or 7 amma intervals, it renders forbidden all the vines that are within 16 amos of the vegetable in every direction. So a vineyard, says Beur halacha 6.2, is going to say that the same is going to be presumably true for a vineyard spaced at intervals that are larger than 5 amos, even if they're going to be less than the 6 amos mentioned in the Mishnah. And also the Tosfot Yom Tov is going to say that a vineyard whose vines are separated by spaces of 6 or 7 amos is too dispersed to be mistaken for an ordinary 4 amos vineyard. So there's no need to have this precautionary fence, and as a basic rule that this can be followed. So basically what he's saying is that only vines situated in the 16 amma radius of these vegetables will become forbidden. And that's going to be the formulation that we're going to be used here. And that gets into the next point. It says it renders forbidden all within 16 amos in every direction. And these 16 amos are measured as a circle, not a square. So if the vegetables prohibit a circle within 16 amos and not a square, then you would end up where if you did it as a square, you would have some sides that would be longer and, along the hypotenuse. And you would have, shorter sides like right perpendicular to the center point of the square or the rectangle, you were drawing a 90-degree line from the square. So you would not end up with this. You wouldn't end up, if you drew a square with 45 vines, you would end up with a smaller number, and it's not going to be right. So the Gemara is going to get into the formulation of this, and is going to qualify the Mishnah's first ruling that vegetables planted in a vineyard whose vines are 4 or 5 amos intervally spaced, you're going to have 45 vines forbidden. And Rabbi Yosei ben Chanina says that this is provided that he planted the vegetables near the middle vines such there are at least 3 rows of vines on each side. And again, that's what I was saying, that you have to imagine that you planted it right where the root ball is in the middle of this vineyard, right on top of a vine. That's going to render 45. But again, if you are moving over to the left or right and you are putting it into the work area, which still counts as the vineyard, then it's, you're still going to draw your 16 amma circle, but the math is going to end up getting up to 52. So Rabbi Avin is going to say in the name of Shmuel that this is provided that the middle vine is encircled by vegetables. In other words, that the Mara Fulda points out that Shmuel is not arguing with Rabbi Yosef ben Hanina's ruling, but explaining his position that the vegetables planted next to the middle must be surrounded on all sides. And the grounds for this requirement is not going to be clear. Even if the vegetables are planted only on one side of the middle vine, then you have 45 vines still falling within the vegetable's 16 amma radius. And so why then would it be necessary to surround the middle vine on all sides? And the explanation is going to be like this, says the Rambam. It's going to say that the law is that even if a substantial amount of foreign seed is planted inside the vineyard, only 45 vines become forbidden. And this is because, says the Rambam in Hilchos Kilayim 6.2, that the 16 amma radius is not mentioned from the outer edge of the vegetables, but from the center point of the vegetables. And accordingly, Shmuel is trying to teach us, explains the Rambam, that the prohibition circle will be found to encompass 45 vines only if the vegetables were planted evenly around the middle vine. In other words, not just putting in one seed, but you've actually now put in a lot of these vegetable seeds around the middle seed. And the Rambam's pointing out that you're measuring from the middle point of where these seeds are clustered, these foreign seeds are clustered, and that's where you're going to be drawing out your radius. So it's very important to know that you've effectively created a circle within a circle. The circle within a circle is going to be the foreign seed, and then your greater circle is what do you reduce. And the Rambam's pointing out that you don't measure from the edge of the foreign seed that's planted there. You're measuring from the center point. And that's important information to know. And the Gemara is going to continue. And it's going to say, how does this even come about where, it's trying to explain how the vegetables planted at the base of the middle vine will render 45 vines forbidden. And the Gemara says that the circle of prohibition encompasses vines within 7 rows containing 7 vines each. And, this is basically saying that, the vineyard planted at 4 amma intervals, and you're going to create a 16 amma radius, and it's going to encompass these vines, and it's going to have a total where, you're looking at the north, east, west, and south, and you're drawing to figure out how many vines fall within that. And it's going to say, exclude from this block of 49 vines, 4 vines at the 4 corners of the vineyard that are outside the parameters of the circle, and there will remain only forbidden 45 vines. That is what we learned in the Mishnah. In other words, it's rendering 45 vines forbidden. So the exclusion, this is going to be the insight by the Rosh, the exclusion of 4 corner vines can be proven through a Talmudic rule that the diagonal of any given square is 40% longer than the sides of the square. And accordingly, the diagonal extending from the middle vine to any one of the 4 corners is 40% longer than the 3 4 amma intervals extending from the middle vine to the outer rows. So since the 3 intervals are 12 amos long, then the diagonal will be 16.8 amos long. So that's how you're going to get into it, where you're going to say it's 7 rows by 7 rows. Before we were talking about what if it's 9 rows by 9 rows, where everything is going to be encompassed by the circle. In this case, it's saying, well, you have 7 by 7. The middle point is a vine, and it's now planted with foreign seed there, and it's overlapping the vine. And if you draw your circle 16 amos out, basically there's going to be some vines that could theoretically be there at the longest point of the circle overlapping this square. It's effectively a square and a circle overlapping. And some of these vines will be cut out, and that's going to be the difference between these two. In other words, yeah, okay, if you have a very, very big vineyard and, you could draw your circle in there and there's vines fully covering it, fine. This is talking about a square where the vines are not fully overlapped by the circle, and that's the point. So it's trying to show how do you calculate that, because what that's going to do is at the very corners of your 49 vines of your 7 by 7 row, those 4 vines will not be touching the circle. You'll have, if you had more rows, if you had 8 rows by 8 rows, then there would be some vines sort of like at the edges of the circle, but not at the corner of the square of the vineyard. So the Mishnah teaches when are 45 vines rendered forbidden. And it says when the vines were planted at 4 amma intervals or at 5 amma intervals. And we see that even when the vines are planted at 4 amma intervals, the circle does not reach the fourth row. And that's, again, the point. The point is that, we have it where you can have a fully utilized square there, where let's say it's 9 vines by 9 vines, and when you're laying out your circle, you will fully touch that circle will fully touch the last vine in the center. In other words, the middle 5th vine on each row will be touched by the circle, and that's going to disqualify it. But again, the corners of that square in the vineyard are not going to be touched by that circle, obviously. So the Gemara is going to give an explanation about it. It's going to say this ruling supports the view of Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera says that the 8 amma distance necessary to separate between 2 rows of vines is exclusive of the place occupied by the trunk. So what this is trying to say is that when we're measuring this, we're not going to look at the edge of the bark of the tree. We're going to look at the middle point of the vine itself. We're going to draw a theoretical point where that vine is, and that's where we're going to be drawing it from it. So the idea is that you might have said, well, how do we draw our radiuses? Maybe what we're going to do with our radiuses is we're going to measure from the edge of the bark and go 16 amos out. And that's not what Rabbi Zera is saying. Rabbi Zera is saying that, no, you say like this vine is going to be disqualified, and you look at the center point of that vine, and then you're going to measure 16 amos out from the center point of that vine. It's a theoretical point, but again, we're looking at circles within circles. And so what we're seeing here, both with the rule that the Rambam says, where we're measuring from the middle point of this foreign seed that's inside of this vineyard, we're also going to be measured from the middle point of where we're starting this circle to draw a radius out. It's going to be the middle part of this vine. It's not going to be the edge of the vine. Now, the Mishnah said that if, however, they were planted at 6 amma intervals or 7 amma intervals, it renders all the vines that are within the 16 amos of vegetables forbidden in every direction. And now we're going to get into this D'Rabbanan thing. And it's going to say the Mishnah does not infer or address the law of a vineyard planted at the intervals of 8 amos up to 16 amos. And we know that, we're covering, well, what happens if you have, 6 vines over here and 3 vines over here, and they're separated by 16 amos? Well, we know that they're going to connect, and they're going to now make a 9-vine vineyard. So we know that these vines are going to connect. So the Mishnah does not address, though, what do you do between 8 amos and 16 amos? And the Gemara is going to infer how this works. So the Gemara says that this supports the view of Rabbi Lazar, and Rabbi Lazar said when the space between the rows of the vineyard is from 4 amos until 8 amos, the introduction of foreign seed within that space, within the 4 amma work area, is prohibited. And by the way, that's going to be d'oraita. It's going to be a prohibition d'oraita. And the foreign seed that's going to be planted there is going to render forbidden the produce of the vines and the seeds. Now, here's the trick. What happens when you're at 8 to 16 amos? And it says, but when the space between the rows is from 8 amos until 16 amos, the introduction of foreign seed is prohibited. You're not allowed to do it. Yet, the foreign seed, if it was planted there, does not render it forbidden. In other words, the produce of the vines and the seeds themselves will not be forbidden. And the Tana of this Mishnah is apparently agreeing with Rabbi Lazar and is not mentioning what happens if you're going to plant within vines that are spaced from 8 amos to 16 amos. And basically, vines separated at these intervals are not going to render forbidden the produce that we're talking about, like in this Mishnah. And that's going to be the key. In other words, what did we learn from 8 to 16 amos? Well, that's going to be a D'Rabbanan thing. And so that's why it's going to be lenient on this, because if you're planting within that space of 8 to 16 amos, you're not allowed to do it. But if you did it, did you render the vines or the vegetables forbidden? No, you didn't. You can still use it. And that's why it doesn't mention it. And that's basically saying that the Tana agrees with that. And so what we're seeing over here is we're seeing a system of how do we organize in our minds, well, a way to calculate what gets forbidden. What we're learning here is we're going to draw a radius. It's going to be a circle. It's not going to be a square. And that you're going to go out 16 amos in all directions. And that what we're also learning is you're going to measure from the center points. Even if that center point is going to be the vine itself, you're going to measure from the middle of the vine. You're not going to measure from the bark. And if you've planted a cluster, as the Rambam's pointing out, a cluster of vegetable seeds there, and there's a small patch there, where are you going to measure from? You're going to measure from the center point of that forbidden area there, and then you're going to draw 16 amos out as a radius going in a circle in all directions, and that's how you're going to determine which vines get forbidden. And the other thing that we're doing is that we're seeing that between 8 and 16 amos, this is going to be a d'Rabbanan thing. You're not allowed to plant within it, but if you did, you didn't render the stuff forbidden. Have a great day.